وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد ومحمد. So yesterday we touched upon different domains of Tawheed, and we could have spoken more, but for reasons of time we'll just limit it. This morning inshallah we'll cover a few practical implications of Tawheed and how Tawheed has a crucial role in relation to refining our souls and eliminating the vicious traits that man may acquire, God forbid. When we speak of eliminating the vicious traits, the traits of vice, the Eastern school of thought, the Eastern ethical schools of thought, even the Greek ethical schools of thought, they all have laid out certain protocols, both individual and collective duties that one has to do when one wants to inhibit the states of vice which may arise in one. However, the problem is that with these schools of thought, they may manage to cut the branch, leaf, or even the stem of the tree of vice. But whether they can cut the roots, that's another matter. So there are different protocols of eliminating vice. And some ethical schools of thought, it may be less clear whether they can eliminate and erase the attributes of vice in a given person. Although it'll go to some degree, they will succeed, but whether it'll eliminate it, here the claim is that Islam has the complete Muhammadan protocol when it comes to eliminating traits of vice and attributes of vice. And Allama Tabatabai has referred to this. He brings a verse of the Holy Quran, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. And with this verse, he says, this is specific to Islam, and that Tawheed is the key of erasing all forms of vice, but it depends on what the vice is and how one has to go about it. So give glad tidings to the Sabireen, those who, when a burden encounters them, now here burden can be used in the absolute sense, any form of burden. When it arises for them, the burden may be outside them, but the burden may be an attribute of vice which is lingering inside them. When they encounter such a burden, they say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So it's Tawheed. We are all Allah's and we're all returning to Him. So here we have to see how Tawheed plays such a role. I'll give 5 or 6 examples inshallah for this session. One vicious trait is that of takabbur, arrogance. With arrogance, one sees oneself superior to others. Yes, God forbid if someone is a leader of a community, is a representative for a community. They may be a minister or even a scholar who is leading. Yes, 99% of them, they fail. They have takabbur. God forbid if they're not equipped to have a leadership role in a community. These people have to leave as soon as possible. You should never accept a leadership role. It's the last test Shaitan has for the believer. It makes no sense for someone young in the beginning of their lives to accept such a role. It's doomed to fail in most cases. It's not something to play around with. It's very difficult not to see oneself superior to others when you have a leadership role. And God forbid if you're a scholar and you have a leadership role. Scholars in themselves, they usually have such a role. Well, just because they speak, they may think they are superior. And so on and so forth. It gets worse and worse sometimes, yes. The opposite of takabbur is tawadhu', which is a form of humility. And humility in ethics isn't seen as necessarily a particular behavior, it's a state of the heart. And in this inner state of yours, you truly don't see yourself as superior to others. This kind of disposition within you is that of tawadhu'. And in real terms, you say, no, I'm truly not superior to others. If the tawadhu' disposition is successfully acquired, yes, takabbur can be gotten rid of. The outcome being that when one makes a decision, it's not based on self-centeredness. It's not based on that since you think you're better than others, that your decisions are based on this mentality. That usually people with takabbur, they always disclose it, unfortunately, yes. It's without noticing. When they speak, the takabbur is manifested very easily and they can't control it. Yes. Usually it's better not to speak. Yeah, only when one speaks the problems are manifested and becomes apparent. And the criterion for tawadhu', as I said, is that state of the heart, where one truly believes they're in a state of destitution, that they're not only they're not superior, but they're inferior even. This is a state of the heart now, it's not an academic thing. They really have to believe this. And yes, sometimes one has to do one's duty, for example, and do amr bil ma'roof. And there may be other things one has to speak out, and they may even speak out harshly sometimes. But that's okay if, whilst doing that, because that's your duty, whilst doing that though, the inner disposition has to be that I'm not superior though, just because it's my duty I'm saying these things. Although here again, most people may fool themselves here also. So, all along, one has to really have a broken behavior within themselves where I'm destitute, and everything which comes out from them and it is manifested out from them, it has to be ego-less. The ego doesn't allow one to have tawadhu'. This ego is a problem, and when the ego is predominant within one, one should never accept a leadership role or go in the community to do tabligh even. These things are the very seeds of takabbur. When it comes to how to solve it, how to cure takabbur, different schools of thought, the ethicists have given protocols of how to solve takabbur. And then Tawheed also has a protocol. We'll go through the different solutions, but the ideal is to solve it through Tawheed. The ethicists say, for example, that one way of curing takabbur and arrogance is deliberation of a particular type, where you deliberate over the principle that the value of a given work or action of a person is the fate and the end result of that action. And since one does not know what the fate of that action is going to be, one is scared to deem oneself superior to others. Just by contemplating, deliberating that I've done an action, I've committed an action, before saying, oh, I am good in doing this action and better than others, you don't know what the fate of that action is. The criterion isn't that action's current status, it's the end goal, the end game, the end result, the fate, the ultimate fate of that action. That would be a criterion according to this principle. And if one truly acknowledges and wholeheartedly acknowledges this principle and believes in it, one will never deem oneself superior to others, because they may say, I may change. This action may deteriorate for the worse. And history has showed this, and maybe some of you have seen examples of people who have expressed a lot of taqwa, but their fate ended in another way. Or people who were sinners, but they ended with a very positive fate. The criterion is the end goal. We don't know how things are going to evolve. And because of that, this helps us to not have takabbur. This is one solution. As they say in England, there's a proverb, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. The Iranians also have a proverb on the same lines, but they say don't count your chickens until the end of autumn. Yes, I think the British one is a bit more ghani maybe, yes. So here, with this protocol that the ethicists are saying, there's a constant state of fear and hope until the end becomes apparent. And so the believer here doesn't acquire that takabbur. But as I said, this is an ethical protocol. With ethical protocols, you have to really work on it for a long period of time before it becomes second nature. And sometimes there's no guarantee. A single, inattentiveness can ruin things, especially when the seeds for takabbur are readily available. This was one ethical way of curing takabbur. Another ethical solution is deliberation again, tafakkur, on different verses of the Holy Quran and traditions of Ahlul Bayt, where what is extrapolated from these verses and traditions is that sometimes even the Prophet may say to you, you will end with a good fate. Even the Prophet will say to you this. Or one of the awliya says, you will end with a good fate. And you have certainty of such a statement because the Holy Prophet told you, for example. But according to these traditions, even if the Prophet tells you, you will end with a good fate, there's still no room for takabbur and seeing yourself superior to others. Why? Because the criterion that one is higher than another is not the outer dimension of a given action, and that you have ended with a good fate, and you really have, but superficially you've ended with a good fate. That's not the criterion. Rather, the criterion is to be superior to others, is if you have khulus before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not just because the zahir of your actions, and you really have ended in a positive fate, but there's no guarantee that your ending in a positive fate had any depth. It may have been a minimum. The khulus factor is important. And this can't be evaluated by the zahir. So even if the Prophet has told you, you will end with a good fate, there's no room for takabbur even here. Because your khulus may be minimum. Your khulus may be compromised. And here, the khulus, only the Holy Messenger knows the khulus of a given person. Only Allah knows, and so on and so forth. We can't be sure. Many people, many ascetics, many zuhad, who do things out of precaution so they have their heavenly rewards, their khulus may be compromised because they keep on doing things to get the rewards. They're using Allah as a means to acquire more and more rewards. It's not bad, but the khulus is compromised. You're not doing it for Allah's sake. Allah is the goal. Allah is the end, is the ends. But when you use Allah as a means to heaven, as a means to get more and more reward, it's not bad, but the khulus is not definitive. It's even possible that you don't have any khulus, or it's a minimum khulus. And some people, all their lives, it's only a story of getting more and more rewards. That's how they see all actions of Islam. And after 30, 40, 50 years, it's still only about rewards. It's not about Allah, wanting Allah for Himself, for the sake of Allah, out of love of Allah. And many sinners, for example, it's possible. These are just, I'm saying when these are possible, you can't, there's no room place for you to deem yourself superior to others. Sometimes there may be sinners and something happens, they have a change, then suddenly they want to go and fight in the name of Islam, and in the battle or whatever they become martyred. What started as a sinner, suddenly we see with utmost khulus, they're ready to give their lives for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These things happen. So, one deliberation was, we don't know what the end result is. The other was a bit more enriched. It says, even if it was a good end, you have a good end fate, there's still no room place for takabbur, and you should never deem yourself superior, because there's another criteria which is more important, and that is khulus, and we don't know how that's going to end. But then there's even a higher state than this, and this is where the Tawheed aspect is, that even if you know that your khulus is high and will remain high until the end, so it's a big if, even if you know that, there exists a state of tawadu and humility whereby even if the Holy Prophet was to tell you that your khulus is higher than X, Y and Z, this state of tawadu, which Tawheed has a role in molding and forming, still tells you that you can't deem yourself superior to X, Y and Z. But you had khulus. The Holy Prophet said that you have khulus and you will have it until the end. And it's more than X, Y, Z. But this tawadu says, I still can't deem myself superior. But this is a higher form now. And here, the key to this tawadhu is that of Tawheed, that encompassing Tawheed that we've been discussing quite a bit yesterday, where this Tawheed teaches one that one is the owner and the master of no perfection or virtue. Tawheed teaches that you do not own and are not the master of any given virtue or perfection that you're manifesting. It's not yours. All perfections, all attributes of perfections are Allah's, period. We went through this yesterday. Man is only a mirror reflecting Allah's perfections. Man, in one of the verses of the Quran says, Ya ayyuhal insan antumul fuqara. Man is nothing, has nothing, essentially has nothing. They just manifest His perfections. That's it. So one will never see oneself, if this Tawheed becomes incorporated in one's heart, one will never see oneself as the owner. Even when the Holy Prophet was to tell you, you have khulus, it will remain until the end. You say, but it's not mine. I'm not the owner of it. I'm nothing. And one sees oneself, therefore, in this light, with this Tawheed, one sees oneself as a safekeeper. This is an important term. One who is given an amana. One is a safekeeper. We need this term a lot as we progress through certain different attributes of vice and how to solve it. And with safekeepers, like with all safekeepers, the deposit given to them, whatever state of perfection it is, one will say, it's not mine, I'm only a safekeeper. So when it's not yours and you truly believe it, you will never see yourself superior to someone else. Because you say, it's not mine. Now this has to be done with true Tawheed being incorporated in your heart. The stronger the Tawheed, the stronger you can do this. But if there's no Tawheed and there's just ego after ego, none of this will make any effect. You're a safekeeper, but that safekeeper will lose you. You think it's yours. But if this is wholeheartedly acknowledged that I have nothing, I'm only a safekeeper, yes, this can erase takabbur. If the idea is truly acknowledged wholeheartedly that I'm nothing, I don't own any perfection, I'm just a safekeeper, this protocol, compared to the previous ones, this may erase it at its root. It's not only a leaf, branch or stem. This, with the proper training, can be sorted relatively quickly. This can even be inculcated in one's child. From 7 years onwards, when they have some understanding of things, this can be inculcated. But the problem is, who is the inculcator? A father who's drowned in egoism, who's not a good model for their child, and the child sees hundreds of hypocrisies day in and day out. Him saying one thing but acting another. Even if the father was to inculcate this in the child, he's inculcating poison. Yes, you can't play around with these things too much. And we see this in our communities. It's not something which is not alien to us. So even if one has all the good of the dunya, has been given all the good of the dunya and akhirah, it's for safekeeping. One is nothing but a safekeeper. And it doesn't grant superiority. So one should never boast, because it's not his. When it's not yours, this boasting is futile. And actually, when you know it's not yours, and you're given more and more, to safekeep, your responsibility should become more and more. You get more scared. And so that example of the mirror and the sun, it's a good example here. No mirror should claim any superiority to the other mirror, because all they're doing is manifesting the light of the sun. Light is the sun's. We're just safekeeping. So, in short, I have nothing, it's all his. This has to be incorporated, and this erases takabbur. However, there are still other things to do, some actions that one can do. This was the academic scaffolding, and one has to start practically to believe this. But this transition of something academic and entering it into your heart, certain actions should be done to facilitate the transition of the academic Tawheed, which we've understood, but positioning it into the heart. That we haven't done yet. We've just understood the principles. To position it into the heart, yes, there are certain actions which may facilitate this positioning of Tawheed into our heart. The more it enters the heart, the less takabbur we will have. For example, in Ayatul Kursi, in chapter 2, verse 255, Lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard, or other verses, Lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. Repeating this a lot, deliberating over it, repeating it. When you're alone sometimes at night, in the middle of the night, believing that it's all Allah's. Lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. Lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. It's all His. Nothing is mine. I'm not the owner of anything. And in many traditions it shows that the criterion to proximity to Allah and the criterion that many prophets were chosen as prophets was this level of tawadu, where you say, I have nothing. So you never deem yourself superior as a result of this, I have nothing. And the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and Allah says, do you know why I chose you as a prophet? He said, no. He said, because from all the people, your tawadu was the highest. This tawadu in this sense, that I'm nothing. And as a result of I am nothing, you never deem yourself superior. Imam Sajjad once, this is more relevant to countries like Tanzania and Africa maybe than in Europe and America, because having for example maids and assistants is something which is the norm here, and there's nothing wrong with that if you treat them properly. And if one can't treat one's child properly, they're not going to treat their maids properly, and so on and so forth. Once Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was calling, when Islam came, the idea of slavery was present. But Islam came with protocols where they would educate the slaves and then free them. And there were many protocols, and Islam was very influential in the freeing of slaves. And today we don't have slaves in that sense, and slaves were only prisoners of war, not the slaves of how the Americans treated slaves from Africa. That was just based on the race. That was racism. But the slavery which was present even before Islam came was a slavery where the prisoners of war were taken because they wanted to, for example, put an end to Islam. They were enemies of Islam, and that kind of thing. Or the enemies of the truth before Islam, for example. So this idea of, it's different to how the Americans took people as slaves. That's unforgivable. And even today in America, they're treating people as slaves, but in a different form. Yes, there's nothing different. It's the same people in America. Just maybe the dhahir may change, but that deeming themselves superior and treating people like slaves, that is ruling now in the West. And look at, for example, all the oppressions in Palestine, all the oppressions in Yemen, in Kashmir, and all the other oppressions. Not only do the West say nothing, but they sponsor it, they pay for it, they aid it. And if you live in those countries, your taxes will contribute to it. But when they taste their own medicine, and let's say with the present situation with what Russia's doing with Ukraine, which we're not justifying what Russia's doing, it's not a good thing. War is bad, invasion is bad. But you see how Europe and America are just panting and they don't know what to do. What's the difference here? It shows it's an ego thing. Here their interests were compromised. Otherwise, they've been killing and killing generations after generations with peace of heart. Their heart at peace, total tranquility. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was calling for a maid and there was no reply. He was looking for where the maid is. When the maid appeared from behind, it was a servant or maybe a slave at that time, said, "Yes, I'm here." He turned around and said, "I was calling you. I didn't know where you were." Then the slave said, look, a slave said this, said, "I knew you weren't going to get angry with me, so I said, I have time to answer. There's no problem." Now that's a very strong mentality here. That, he knew that Imam Sajjad wasn't going to, for example, attack him or... So Imam Sajjad went into the sajda position and did sajda and said, "Alhamdulillah." That there's no traces that the slave even thinks that I am more superior to them. And now, the actions that one should do at the same time as this perception of Tawheed which one has to incorporate, there are actions which facilitate this transition. One is your ibadat, your wajibat for example, or even the mustahabbat, even if it's little, but be persistent with your ibadat. Don't, for example, for a number of weeks do a lot and then just let it go. Although with the wajibat it has to be constant. But with the other ibadat, have a degree of persistency. Even if it's little, it's okay. But do it every day. Other actions, for example, a certain part of the day, especially at night, when no one is seeing you, go into long sajda positions in a state of prostration for a few minutes if possible. In the beginning maybe 1 or 2 minutes and then a bit longer. If possible, no one should find out, even your spouse, if possible. And if they do, it's okay, but the problem is if someone finds out, the takabbur comes again. We're not ready for these kind of things. We have to be very private, especially with the mustahabbat. With the wajibat, it's okay. With the mustahabbat, the more private you are, the safer you are. In the middle of the night, alone, in solitude, speak with Allah, express your nothingness before Allah. These things help that transition of that perception of Tawheed, that I'm nothing, it's all His. This helps. Another action which is useful for this transition of this perception of Tawheed into your heart is always speak on the side of haqq, that which Allah has said is haqq, is truth, even if it's against your best interests and it's not in your advantage, it's not in your monetary advantage, it's not in your advantage in other areas, but it doesn't matter. You always speak it. This is very important because this facilitates this idea that none of these perceptions, none of these values are mine. It's all Allah's. So I will only say the truth. I will only act on the truth. What do you mean it goes against my self-interest? I have nothing. What do you mean it goes against my honor, my izzah? I'm a somebody. You're just making that up. It's a construct. We said with this Tawheed, you're nobody. This constructed personality of yours, no, it's all a game. It's nothing. Another thing is that you have to distance yourself from scenarios that may precipitate or enhance your Tawheed. For example, being in assemblies where everyone's going to praise you. Don't go to those gatherings. Especially if you have a leadership role and someone invites you, and it's going to just be flattery and complimenting, and this is going to be a threat. You may become susceptible to takabbur here. Try to avoid it. Or even avoid assemblies where the heads of a community are all assembling. Now that can even be a greater threat. Because you say, I'm someone here, I'm in the midst of the heads of the community. Then there are actions which the Sharia has given, actions which may break one, make one destitute, break one's ego, break that pseudo character that they've built for themselves. These actions help. For example, on a tablecloth, when you sit and have dinner, you don't sit at the head of the tablecloth or the head of the table. Then you may be susceptible to takabbur here. And then people say, no, you sit at the table, you sit at the head of the table. Okay, it may happen once, it may happen twice, but then eventually, if you see this is going to be a continuous trait, either avoid assembling with such people or somehow guide them. These things are very minor things, but it has implications. Saying Salamun Alaikum before another. This also, even if it's a child, like the Holy Messenger would always say Salam first. If someone who's of a lesser socio-economic status to you, and they invite you, you accept their invitation. Sit and dine with those who are lesser off than you. Sometimes there may be masjids where, and maybe, God forbid, inshallah not, but even our African brothers may have seen this, where you go to a mosque but you're not welcomed in that mosque because of the racism attitudes of the people who are heading that mosque and who have sponsored that mosque. And you go there and you see they're treating you badly. Yes, there's no need to go. That mosque will have a lot of facade and harm to those people and will only hurt you. There's no need to go to that mosque. That mosque wasn't built on taqwa. Don't worry. You don't have to build a mosque out of marble. You can build it out of straw. A mosque is a mosque. The incentives behind the mosque is important. You should never worry if you see such racist behavior, be it in Tanzania, God forbid if you see it in Iran. Don't panic. Yes, it's not the end of the world. Yes. Inshallah, you'll find another mosque which is good, and so on and so forth. Inshallah, you will construct your own mosque, not out of marble, but out of other things. Clothing Simple clothing is good also, to break that ego, not have takabbur. Wearing clothing which has a brand, I'm not saying whoever wears it is going to be a bad person, but you understand what I mean. It makes one susceptible. My clothing is better than what this person is wearing, for example. Wear very simple clothing, yes. And never mistreat those who are under you for whatever reason. It may be in the house, it may be you're a project manager, for example, but you don't neglect their needs and try to serve those who are needy. Okay, so that was one example of one vicious trait, that of takabbur, how ethical schools of thought have given protocols for it, but how Tawheed really can erase it. And through certain actions, you facilitate that perception of encompassing Tawheed into your heart. This second one is not too much, so I'll cover this too. It's only very small because we've covered most of it. And that is ujb. Ujb, self-conceitedness, is a bit different to takabbur. With takabbur, you deem yourself superior to someone outside you. With self-conceitedness, it's in the name. You're very pleased with yourself. You're very happy with yourself. You say Alhamdulillah to yourself quite a bit. You think you're doing a lot of good things. This can be a killer. And here, this can even be more difficult than takabbur, because the threat in takabbur is outside you, but the threat with ujb is within you. And here too, it's very similar here with takabbur. Here the only cure is that of Tawheed, where you acknowledge that you have nothing, and if all the perfections of the world were poured into you, it doesn't change who you are. You're still needy, you have nothing. You haven't changed. That has to be incorporated within. And here, the story that the scholars have given in this regard is again in relation to Nabi Musa alayhi salam, where Allah says, next time we converse, bring with me a creation which you feel you are better than them. So Nabi Musa started and said, okay, let me go. Went in Bani Israel to see. He started with the Zuhad, the ascetics and the worshippers, and said, well, I may not be better than them, these people. Then he said, he approach the corrupt people, the fusaq. But he said, no, I may not be better than them either. Now there are different variations to this hadith. Then he said, okay, let me go to the next best thing, the animals. He looked at certain animals like sheep, cattle. Look, he wholeheartedly believed, I may not be better than this animal. Look, an ethical school of thought can't teach you this, that I may not be better than an animal. The encompassing Tawheed can teach you this only, because that teaches you I have nothing. When you have nothing, you even doubt yourself in relation to an animal. Then some traditions say that he found a dog with a very bad state, was very ill, with fleas and everything. So he put the rope around his neck to take the dog. Halfway through he said, well, no, I'm hesitant. No, didn't. Other than encompassing Tawheed, no Western or Eastern school of thought can have this. Now, sometimes you may see on television or newspapers these Hindu ideologies and things, they may say these statements. Where is the reference? Our reference is the Quran. And if you research it, their reference is also Islam. They have books, but you don't find encompassing Tawheed in their books. If they just give a statement which emanates from encompassing Tawheed, it's something they've got from Islam. Find the reference for it. See where the origins of their statement is. And so Nabi Musa, barehanded, barefooted, went and said, "No, I couldn't find it." Then Allah said, if you had brought that dog, we would have stripped you from your prophethood. So that's another spiritual illness. A third spiritual illness is that of bukhl, miserliness, where one refrains from giving to others at times when giving to others is the proper thing to do. Sometimes just giving to others may be a bad thing to do. You may make the situation worse. They may go and then sin with what you've given them. These situations exist. But when giving is the proper thing to do, you refraining from giving, here, what's the reason? You can help them out. Why are you refraining? Here again, the ethicists again, the ethical schools of thought have, even the Islamic, schools of thought from the ethical point of view, has come with certain protocols and solutions. For example, one solution in the ethical school of thought is tafakkur, and deliberating over the side effects of miserliness which are written in the ahadith. What your situation is going to be in the hereafter if you live a miserly life. Going through those ahadith, there are many. And then having remorse. You don't want to have that status in the hereafter. Or for example, doing tafakkur and deliberation on those ahadith which speaks about the heavenly rewards. This school of thought, for example, wants you to think about the rewards you will get if you are not miserly and you give. You can't do tafakkur on those rewards, it will act as an incentive. Or even beyond that, for example, tafakkur in relation to the benefits of giving, the benefits in the dunya of giving, not only in the hereafter, but doing tafakkur on what are the benefits when you give in the dunya, give to people. Or what are the side effects of not giving in the dunya, for example. For example, there's a proverb in England that what goes around comes around. I'm not sure if you have a similar proverb, but that which you do in the negative sense, you will be a recipient of later. If you're miserly, you will face miserliness, for example. And even experience, wise people, Muslim or non-Muslim, through experience, you ask, for example, a 70, 80, 90-year-old person to give you the experiences of their life, they will say, whenever you give, more sustenance comes your way. Whenever you don't give in your life, your livelihood would be restricted. Someone went to a Arif and said, I have a lot of problems monetarily. What do I do? The Arif said, go and give. Even that very little that you have, go and give it. These things exist. Another ethical solution to being miserly is that of tafakkur again, deliberation on death. Reminding yourself of death. You don't have to be old to remind yourself and remember death. And by that I mean you see the dunya as transitory. This phase is a transitory phase. You're in transit. The destination is elsewhere. Wallahi, it's elsewhere. We are only in transition here. It's going to end. And here, your aql, your intellect dictates when you're in a transitory place, don't build any affinity towards such a place and the things here, the glitter of such a place. These are all transitory affairs. And so with deliberation of death, you see that one's affinity to worldly matters decreases. And when one's affinity towards, for example, money or worldly things, when it decreases, one gives more easily. As a result of your affinity to worldly matters decreasing, you'll give more and more easily. And you'll spend more for your akhirah, for example. And this will inhibit your miserliness. So these were 3 ways of trying to treat miserliness, and they're effective, more or less. But the Tawheedi solution is something else. Here with Tawheed, this teaches us that here one isn't the owner of anything that is in your disposal. You have a lot of money, a lot of houses, a lot of different things. But you don't see yourself as the owner of all those things. In true terms, in real terms. You're a safekeeper. Look, the safekeeper is important. We're nothing but safekeepers. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said that So, no, before I give the tradition, so no one will, when you see yourself as a safekeeper, as Allah's safekeeper, if this is truly acknowledged, then one will readily spend for Allah without any fear. Because you see yourself truly as having nothing. What you do have is Allah's. You either believe it or you don't. And if you truly do believe it, that what you have is Allah's, this you'll easily spend in Allah's way. No one will refrain from spending that which is under one's safekeeping in a manner that you know the owner of that thing is satisfied with. And here Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, يَرَوْنَ الْمَالِ مَالَ اللَّهِ. You have to see mal, wealth, as all being Allah's. It's all Allah's wealth. It may be money, it may be knowledge. One may be miserly with respect to money, with respect to knowledge. Miserliness in respect to knowledge is even worse. And so, one, it's not yours. When it's not yours, you get to believe that through Tawheed. Your affinity towards it will go down, and then you will spend it easier. You'll spend. Or with knowledge. That knowledge that you've acquired is not yours. You don't have any affinity towards this knowledge. When people ask you, you keep on answering them. But keeping onto wealth or knowledge for yourself, and you don't want to share it or disclose it, that's going to inconvenience one. And in the ahadith, keeping onto wealth has been compared to keeping a dead, ill-odored carcass at home. When you just keep on the wealth, to keep on giving it away, only that much out of necessity that you need. Although these things are difficult. But compare yourself with last year. Are you getting better? At least if you're getting a bit better, still you're journeying towards perfection. My main worry is people who year after year, they're getting worse and worse. And the system in the West precipitates this. Through the mortgages that they offer and other things, the lifestyle there in the West is a lifestyle where this is life. You just go after a bigger and bigger car, a bigger and bigger house, a better and better mobile, a better and better this, a better and better that, and just a downward spiral. Yes. Now here too, there are practical steps to facilitate this perception of Tawheed entering your heart. One is, for example, whenever you acquire an affinity towards something, give it away. For example, someone bought you a watch, and it's a Rolex, or it's a good watch at least. Most of your friends may not have it, and you wear it, so you like it. Okay? If someone says to you, "Can I have that watch?" Wallahi, Allah likes you here. If someone says to you, "Oh, that's a very nice watch," Wallahi, Allah is saying to you, give it to them. This is, I'm looking at you now. And to be given such a test, it's very good. Now, some scholars, for example, they use these loopholes because they wear these rings, and then when they go with the taxi driver, and the taxi driver says, "Oh, that's a very nice ring. If you want to live Tawheed," you say, "Yeah, it's yours. No problem." So they say to the spouse that, "I'll give this ring to you. It's your ring." And then the spouse says, "Okay, thank you. I'll give it to you so you can wear it." So when someone asks you, that's a loophole. Instead of getting closer to Allah, you're getting more distance from Allah. What are you playing at? And if it's really now your spouse's, now you really can't give it because you need their permission. When you're developing an affinity towards something, give it away. Now someone may say, "Oh, I like your trousers." Yes. Okay, give it away, but not at that time, for example. Just go wear another pair of trousers and say, "Here you are." No problem. You see? If one become, you can't do this from tomorrow. Don't from tomorrow now everyone wants to. Well, maybe everyone will now go and look at people's rings and say, "Oh, I like your ring," for example. No, the purpose is that over time you see yourself easily giving your wealth to others. That you may even reach a status like Imam Hassan alayhi salam, where it's recorded 2 or 3 times in his lifetime he gave his house away. He would give land away. For example, he had a slave and he saw many good traits in this slave. When he saw very good traits in this slave, not only did he free the slave, but said, "This slave now will be someone, will be a leader of a community." And I think the trait that the slave had was he was consuming food, a dog was passing, the slave then gave food to the dog too, because he was embarrassed of eating in front of a dog. When Imam Hassan alayhi salam saw this, he then freed him and gave him a very big plot of land. And now the freed slave is now just continuing. He had the qualifications for this. So you just give it away. Avoid being preoccupied with these things. These are all hindrances. Also, try to give, even if it's small. Even, let's say if it's 1,000 shillings, for example. Even if it's small, but give every day. Although I'm not sure if 1,000 shillings is that much. But for example, in America, I would tell the brothers 50 cents, $1 at most. In England, 50 pence. Something very small, but every day. This thing that, not every year, just giving $10,000. And that's not going to help. That which helps is this nature being built within you of giving every day. Yes. Try to do that. Persistence again. And before shaitan deceives you, try to do it quickly. Try to give things away quickly, because if time passes, then you may hold an affinity towards it and things become difficult. That's another thing. And finally, not to socialize with the ahlud dunya. Some people, when you go to a party or a gathering, when you start sitting down, oh, so how's work? Where do you work? What is your work? How much do you get paid? This place, did you buy this place? Did you rent it? How much is it? Your house, is it on a mortgage? Not. All dunya talk. It's poisonous. These environments are poisonous. If once you happen to accidentally sit in one of those gatherings, don't worry, but try to avoid it next time. These things only kind of precipitate and aggravate that disposition of miserliness. Okay, there are other traits too, but I think time-wise, if we have a rest, or yes. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى الطاهرين. Yes, if there are questions, please. Yes. Yes, yes, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. No.
Patience and putting justifications on these good deeds we are living with. But I have some few, it's not a questions, but we need to share sometimes. Yeah. Number one is just like this. Is the perfection of moral virtue or moral virtue justified? Number two, in relation to liberty, tranquility, equality, equity, are the rights of being, are the rights of being protected in relation to our current affairs, especially to these Eastern worlds, Africans, and even some parts of Southern America. So my question is just like that. In relation to liberty, equality, tranquilo, rights of being are protected. And the last one, what is our positions for this Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam and Ahl al-Bayt followers and these circumstances?
Now, as you said, that you're not asking questions. Just these are comments that one has to think about. Food for thought. No, thank you. Yes, one has to think about it. That one's liberty, one's freedoms in society, be it in Africa or in America, are they being protected or not? What are we doing about it? What has Ahlul Bayt said about it? These things we have to, in discussions in 2 or 3 in pairs, for example, discuss. Yes. Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Yes.
Any position of leadership requires some or high level of firmness.
Yes.
Discipline.
Yes.
And you can see that with the principal of a school, for example, and you'll know that later you realize that he or she was not arrogant, or it was something that he or she had to do. Because by nature in a group or in 1, 2 plus individuals, there's always people who there's misbehavior, influencing, it happens. So within our leadership guidelines, if you take the first trait that you talked about with regards to arrogance and tawadu, so like how do you draw lines with regards to managing a group, leading a group in an Islamic way, or even in a business, for example, where you employ 5, 10, 50 people, and for sure you will get people who are bad apples and they will ruin the environment or the work ethic, if not for a few minutes, for a long time. So what are the Islamic guidelines with regards to these traits?
Someone has a leadership position. The first question is the leadership position in a community in relation to what? What's the objective? Is it guidance of the masses, like for example a gathering like this, coming to camp. Here the goal is guidance of people. It's not a camp of just enjoying ourselves and having a good time. It's education, that kind of thing. Sometimes that's the incentive. Sometimes the incentive is, no, to earn money for the sake of earning and having a better life. Sometimes no, it's earning money. But even there, the earning money, the objective is to help an Islamic cause. It's different, these are all different. Where, with the first and the third, since the objective is Islamic, any form of discipline can only help. It's a form of amr bil ma'roof, because you're thinking of the goal. And so you may be harsh sometimes, but that's in line of guiding people. Even then, even though you have to have discipline, inside you have to believe you're nothing. That's something important. You shouldn't think that you're superior. You have a goal, you want to do amr bil ma'roof or guide someone towards that holy goal, so you may have discipline, but at the same time believe that you're not superior to them. And that's through that encompassing Tawheed. But no, sometimes in a job, one is working in an accountancy firm, for example, or any job where there are people under you, and your incentive is earning money. Yes, discipline is good there, but it's for earning money. It's not for a cause, a good cause. It's for you just to have a more and more good life. Here, that discipline, it would be acting as a disservice. Now, does that mean then don't have discipline at work? No, of course not. But only that amount of discipline, when your aim is money to live, only that amount of discipline is required to earn that much that you can have a life which is on a par with your status. Why that extra amount? Unless the money you want to give for a cause. Now look, each one of us, we come from a background where our fathers, our forefathers they always had a big house. It wasn't luxurious, but they always had a big house. That's what you were used to. And then you will go after a big house. Earning money for a big house, there's no problem there. And that amount of discipline to get that. But when you have a big house with luxury, and it's all dunya, even that discipline there is in the line of that luxury. So that's where the red lines are. I'm not sure if I've managed to convey the point, but yes. Yes.
So now your mas'uliyah is to make sure, or you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put you in that position as the tool for those people's provision. So like if you fail, for example, or if you don't work hard, if you don't take on that responsibility, those people then may not have an income, for example. So is that an appropriate way to think of that leadership position?
That would be a holy incentive. Like the incentive here is education. In this case, it would be, and everyone has to evaluate for themselves. We can't judge people what the incentives are. But here, your incentive isn't to earn more money to get a bigger house or a luxurious life. Is, now I have this position, there are people who their livelihoods is closely intertwined with my leadership position, and if I was to fail, their lives would be compromised. Yes, here discipline would be a very normal and rational thing to do, yes.
I have one other question about yesterday's talk. You know, sometimes when you're a parent, the child comes and says, you know, Mum, why does shaitan, for example, exist? So when I was listening yesterday, I just wanted your help to clarify something for me. So am I explaining to my children that evil does not exist absolute evil isn't existing, because many times in our societies we have this dichotomy between good and evil. Don't do this, it's bad, that's what it pleases shaitan. Do this because this pleases Allah. But on par of what I understood yesterday, that even shaitan is absolute perfection but in vice. So he is a manifestation of Allah. So Allah cannot be bad or evil. So how do I explain this to my child when they ask me, okay, for example, why does shaitan exist? Why did Allah make shaitan? Number one. And number two, if the child comes and says, okay, so if everything is pure existence and good, why is it that these bad things exist, like war, like oppression, like hunger, poverty, for example? Does that mean it's because the people have manifested Allah's attributes to vice maximally? So we are the cause of those things, not Allah has caused poverty, or Allah has caused war, hurt and hunger, for example.
Yeah, these two questions. Yes. So here, since you're saying how to answer to a child, if I want to answer to an adult, it may be a different answer. But since you're saying how to answer to a child, so yes, so even Iblis, the creation of Iblis, is good. As Ayatollah Jawadi Omri says, Iblis is the cause of our perfections towards Allah. Where Iblis has been given a responsibility from Allah, whereby if we forget Allah, Iblis comes and tempts us. If we don't forget Allah, Iblis won't come and to tempt us. The more we forget Allah, the more satanic temptations come our way. So these are all, it's like a cleansing protocol for us. Has a very important role in relation to our perfection. In relation to the wars and everything, at the end of the day, these wars and oppressions are a manifestation of Allah's name, Al-Mudil, the misguider. Allah misguides those who want misguidance. But these are actions at the end of the day, and all actions are Allah's. But yes, that person who is committing those bad actions and manifesting Allah's misguider attribute, yes, at the same time that they are polluting themselves and becoming worse and worse, and become more and more distant from Allah as a result of being misguided and wanting misguidance. But even that oppression, that war, the killing, the actual action itself is for the betterment of society. Allah sees it, we don't. Just one example, although this is a definitive principle, but the examples one has to kind of see the world, see history and see things. When the Islamic Revolution of Iran came, when it's very difficult after 2,500 years of monarchy to have an Islamic revolution. People don't suddenly all change. Yet the leadership came, Imam Khomeini came, he guided the masses. But there were only 25 million people at that time. Here, what happened immediately after was the imposed war against Iran, 8 years. There were many martyrs given there, many people died unjustly. And also within Iran there was a civil war, where the MKO, the Munafiqeen, Iranians were killing Iranians. These things that you're seeing with Daesh, we've seen it in Iran. An Iranian would skin an Iranian alive. Daesh, these MKO people who were Iranians, they were Muslims. What they did to other Iranians just to kill the revolution. But these actions led to a stronger revolution, led to a cleansing process. Islam became stronger in Iran. Look, after 40 years, where most of these 40 years, the world was against them. But they keep on becoming stronger and stronger, inshallah. Yes, and these things are a bit difficult sometimes. Some areas of thought maybe it's not very wise for a child to because they don't have all the rational equipment to analyze it. It may not be wise to open certain areas. Yes, sorry, yes.
When we were discussing the concept that whatever you may have, wealth, knowledge, it doesn't belong to you. You are just a trustee. An example crossed my mind, something that I've had a personal experience. There was just recently he died, a person very knowledgeable, several PhDs, has done a lot of research work, the most knowledgeable in the university. And yet towards the end of his life, he got into dementia and he couldn't remember anything that he had learnt or he had taught or he knew. He would not even recognize his own wife.
Yes.
It's very profound.
It's a very good point, yes, yes. Yes, some people the aging, the skin ages. Some people, the bones age and they can't walk very well. This brother, actually with this brother, may Allah enlighten his soul, but with this brother, they aged, the brain aged in a very difficult way. It's not a bad thing, but it's really area to really think about, that nothing is yours. Yes. And yes, it can happen to us too. Allama Tabatabai, towards the end of his life, he would also not recognize those around him. Even when he was given a glass of water, he wouldn't even remember there's a glass of water in his hand. But when the adhan was given, he was very aware and conscious and would do the salat. This was towards the very end of his life. And then the salat would end, he would go in a state again. Although that's a bit different, but yes, these things are real, yes. One has to take lesson from it, yes.
Sheikh, I just had a question. From what we've learned so far, we're just manifesting attributes of Allah. We're just reflecting what He's giving us. And one could say that, given the topics we talked today, that Allah has created us but just to worship Him, right? One could imply or maybe take it in a way that, okay, He has created us just to worship Him. Someone could take it as a form of arrogance or a form of self-conceiting, and maybe probably use it to justify that we're just manifesting some of His qualities. So I should be allowed to do this. What can we tell someone?
Yes, this idea of He created us to worship Him, that is a very delicate sentence. It's not how it sounds. Remember the 4 words, being, being, and being, being. That is the second being, being, what you just said. Because we want to be Allah-like, we want attributes of perfection, we're journeying towards perfection. But why Allah created us? Because He's absolute perfection. It's requiring of His existential nature that He manifests. If He didn't, we would have attributed deficiency to Him. Like the painter example I said, or the surgeon who only has one patient.
So if that's the case, then okay, He's manifesting, He's creating, He created. Then, just argument's sake, then why if He's just creating out of His mercy, then why should we be, we should be like...
The being, He's creating out of because of who He is, the first being. But now He's created. Some of the things He's created are people with the free will to do things. Now, do they have to just be left alone? If He hadn't created someone with a free will, we would have attributed deficiency to Him, because He has free will. How can someone with attribute of perfection, of free will, not create creatures with a free will? Now He's created them. Does He just leave them? He says, no, the protocol is, come to me. Perfection. He's perfection, and we're all going towards perfection. And we are all going to Him. But are we going to see His attributes of mercy there or his revenge or punishment, that's another story in the hereafter. Sorry, yes, yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Just it's not a question, but to emphasize and cement what about the solutions to solve the arrogance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 53, verse 32, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنِ اتَّقَى. So do not hold yourselves pure, sinless. He knows best him who keeps from the obedience. The verse warns those who seem themselves are pure from others. They are arrogant. Because it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows who is pure from human beings. This is just to make the emphasis. But because the solution was just based on the normal life, but I have taken the example from the Quran. Even someone who cannot seem himself as better than others in terms of ibadah. But second one is about the giving, as you presented. This is about the giving. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. The verse was revealed concerning about Imam Ali and Fatima when they were in fasting, while the poor man comes around the door. He is knocking the door. We need some food, we need this, and they are taking their breakfast. Imam Ali used to give the food. Because they are in need of that. What does it mean? This is not give and take away, because someone cannot give a certain thing until he gets. But the verse, what we learn from the verse, we have to give. مسكين ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا. Then إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. We do not expect from you the thanks, the rewards or that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ahsan. Very good point. Yes.
You talked about this spiritual disease of urge and takabbur, but sometimes within our circles we have people of not very, let's say the munafiq, or somebody who is not displaying very good akhlaq, and there's hadith I think from the ai that we have to stay away from people like that. And when it happens within the families, that there's people within the family that are problematic, or I'll just be very open, somebody who's showing characteristics of homosexuality and stuff like that, and we're told to keep away, but then their family too. Where do we draw the line of, this is a family member, but yet he's displaying, hypocritical tendencies? If we keep away, it sounds like arrogance, but we're still told to keep away. So how do we address these kind of issues?
If the keeping away is either because you fear you may become susceptible to that sin, or you may deviate, yes, that's a rational thing to do, keeping away. Or however, if you keep away just because you hate that person for doing such a thing, or it's a taboo in your society, that won't be very Islamic, because you have to care for your community, especially if they're family, because family is God's way of saying these are your direct responsibilities now. So with that, saying that this is Allah's creature, I want to care for this creature, and I'll do my best to help them with that sense, for the sake of Allah, and that would be very commendable. Yes. Yes. And either way though, whether you succeed or not, or in helping them, it's all from Allah though. Yes. Okay, we'll have breakfast maybe inshallah. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله.